Hello class, and welcome back to our lesson here. We'll address section 14, and we're still in corrections, and we'll talk about life of an inmate behind bars, and picture 455 on page 455 speak volumes. It's a pretty scary guy there patrolling the hallway in a jail, but I guess that's how it has to look like. I worked as I said in the last session, I worked in probation and parole, and opened one of the unused jail prison in the state of Alaska, and had an exposure to institutional life. Worked in the street as a field probation officer, and then transferred over to work probation and parole in a institution that's called institutional probation and parole officer. So I know a little bit about life in jail, luckily from the other side of the fence, and was able to go home every evening. But I want to talk to you about a little bit about that. So in the next 30 minutes, we'll talk about data. There's a lot of data available out there, which summarizes life behind bars in our modern society. The statistics. We'll talk a bit about the future and the history of our prison life and incarceration. Philosophy. The prison population is interesting, especially your case textbook talks about female prisoners a little bit. Prison violence and institutionalization, re-entry, and a little bit about sex offenders. We'll get this started here, and let's throw out some data. Let's assume our incarcerated population is 100%. Then when you take a look at the textbook page 393, 31% of these individuals are in a prison and in a jail. Now, I don't know if you know the difference between jail and prison, but a prison is run by the state, by DOC. This is where sentenced inmates are housed. Jail is mostly run by a local or a county, and you have unsentenced inmates in some states. In some jurisdictions, you also have misdemeanors, so serving a time in jail for, up to a year. So there's pretty much a difference between jail and prison. There's no unsentenced prisoner in a state prison. They are being housed in jail. And there's some philosophy behind it, because everyone who's not sentenced is technically innocent. So he's being housed in a jail, and again, mostly the misdemeanors who serve less than a year being housed in the jail as well. Everything else will be housed under the state supervision in a prison. Your textbook on page 436 shows us that we have currently around 2.5 million people in a facility, in facilities throughout the U.S., and that's a lot. That's really a lot, and we increased by over 250% in the last 25 years, and there's a reason for it, which we'll now talk about this reason, or these reasons, in this lesson, but over the time I'm sure you will be exposed to that question as well. The age groups of our inmates, interestingly enough, is 55 years or older. That's an increase of 272% in the last 16 years. And your textbook talks about that on page 458. There's a nice graph there. If you want to turn to page 458, figure 1412. Why is that the case? Well, it could be partly because, two main reasons. First, maybe because the inmates had longer sentences, maybe some life sentences without parole, depending on the state. Some had maybe the three strikes rule. They violated the law 3 times with felony status, and were sentenced to life without parole, and they served the rest of their life behind bars. So they get older and older. On the other hand, maybe some criminals get simply smarter, and they're not being caught while they are in their 20s and 30s. Interesting enough, when we talk about that inmates get older and older, and most likely will spend the rest of their lives behind bars, there's a Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Plata, in 2011. Your textbook summarizes that case well on page 460. But the judges pretty much said that overcrowding leads to prison violence. Well, and I think that makes sense. It's kind of surprising that the Supreme Court had to decide that. If you put a lot of persons together in a small room and tell them now you're going to share everything together, that will eventually increase violence amongst the group. Okay, prison life. I said earlier in one of the other lectures I gave that I believe prison is a gladiator school in our modern times, and that if someone goes to prison and doesn't know a lot about criminal behavior or the tricks and how to get by and what to do, how to play the games, then he certainly will learn that in prison, and I call every prison a gladiator school, unfortunately. Well, that's my personal opinion. We call it total institution, page 456, and 457, excuse me. And total institution is nothing else than a term which describes the institution which provides all necessary tools existence for those who live within its boundaries. That means it's a closed environment. Page 457 also talks about prisonization, which is nothing else than you take a person, put him behind bars, exclude him from the society, and this person will adapt to a new social lifestyle. If we do that and we separate inmates from the society, which obviously is the purpose of a prison, because you want to keep the society protected and safe and increase public safety by taking those who violate our rules to jail and behind bars. But if you do that, you create a new society within the fences of a prison. As you can read in your book, and I just want to summarize it real quick here, it leads to gang problems, aging population, mental illness, overpopulated prison programs, budgetary problems, increased taxes, prison violence, and secondary victimization. There are some opinions out there who say, well, if we take someone to an overcrowded jail, a total institution, we actually victimize this person again. So he's not just being punished for what he did, but now we go a step further and victimize him again. Prison violence. Your book talks about the deprivation model on 462, which is kind of interesting, but I want to add a little more to it. And this theory only says, if I can read this real quick to you guys, that an inmate creates aggressions as a result of frustrations, because they're being deprived of freedom, consumer goods, sex, and other staples of life outside the institution. Well, that's very true. That's very true. You take away somebody's freedom, and imagine I'll take you to a prison cell and say you're going to eat when I tell you to eat, you're going to sleep when I tell you to sleep, and by the way, there's not a lot of physical contact, and if there's a lot of physical contact, it's me putting handcuffs on you. Well, so what do you think happens to a person inside a facility, and maybe this person is being sentenced to life? I'm not getting into the argument with you guys if this is fair or if you deserve that. That's not the point I'm making. I'm just making the point, what do you think happens to a person when you put him in solitary confinement, or a SMU unit where I worked, a special management unit? A special management unit, and probably you've seen that on TV, there are a lot of shows out there, where a person is confined in a cell for 23 hours a day. With books, something to write, and that's pretty much it. We take away any social contact, any touching, any feelings, and feed him 3 times a day, and that's pretty much it. We house him like that. What do you think happens to a person? Does that create aggression, depression, mental illness? Most likely it does. I'm not an expert in this field, but I can assume that it would probably happen to me. We talk about prison rape a lot on page 466, and that is a big problem in our society, in jails as well, where there is a federal prison rape elimination act in place, and certain constructions within the jail had to be changed. So, for instance, there's no In some, there's prisons can only shower in a certain area, in a certain group, under cameras. It is lit and easy accessible, so rapes cannot take place. We have relative deprivation, and your book talks about it again on 462, which, if I can quote this real quick for you guys, the inmate's aggression is caused when freedoms and services that the inmate has come to accept as normal are decreased or eliminated. So let's assume somebody goes to jail for 10 years. From this day on, when he enters the facility, we tell him to get up in the morning, to count our inmates. We tell him when to eat. We tell him what to eat, what to wear, on what side of the hallway he has to walk, and when does he have to be back in his room. We pretty much structure his or her day. And we do this because of safety issues, to manage our population in a facility. But let's assume this person gets used to that and follows through for 5 or 6 years and learns to eat when we tell him to eat and not to take care of his own meals a day. And once a sudden, we tell him now he can go on parole. So we take him out of jail after 6 years and tell him, oh, by the way, here's some money, go and buy you some food and make yourself something to eat. I can share a very interesting case of mine where I supervised a parolee up in Anchorage, and he had been in jail for about 27 years. He came out of jail, and he was really nervous because he wasn't institutionalized. And what this means is just what I explained to you. He got out of jail, and he went to a gas station and saw a little machine where you can pretty much, that there was some sausages on it, you can make your own hot dog, and he wanted to buy a hot dog there. And he stood in front of this little machine there and tried to get a hot dog out of it and try to get all the ingredients for it and try to pay that. And he couldn't get it done. He did not know how to make a hot dog. So he called me late in the evening and said, Marcus, I'm just out here at the gas station trying to get something to eat, and I don't know how to make a hot dog. Do I pay this first? And if so, do I have to put the mustard on by myself? Is somebody's doing that for me? It's a little example. It tells you what happens to people when we put them to jail and institutionalize them. Again, it's not a question of somebody deserves it, somebody has to be behind jail or behind bars to protect our society. It is just a result and a cause, and what happens to somebody behind jail. So the big question is, can we change that? We tried. There were some approaches where race and gender was segregated, and this led to a lawsuit where somebody said, well, simply because I'm Asian, I shouldn't be placed in that mod together with Asians, and simply because I'm black or white, I shouldn't be placed in that mod with that gender. However, it's usually done this way simply because we want to reduce prison, gang, and the forming of racial groups. And as you know, and we've probably seen this all on TV a lot, when you take a look at page 463, and from there on, let me just take a look at the gangs on 465, 465 on figure 14.3, you actually see some gangs, examples of gangs. We all have heard those names, the Crips, the Bloods, the MS-13, the Aryan Brotherhood. And those gangs, sometimes, some of them, developed within the prison culture. And why was that? Because there was an identity. They want to protect themselves from other groups. It's simply the prison violence was so high and officials couldn't control it that some of those groups developed for self-protection. Now, it tells in your book that 11.7% in federal prisons, the population belongs to a security threat group, 13.4% in state prisons, and for instance, the county jail in LA has about 10%. I'm not sure if that's really accurate. I think it's a little more, but I don't have any numbers available right now to prove my point. So if you are interested in that, just look up some other numbers. I'm sure sometimes it's a little higher, but again, that would be something we could maybe look into. it developed the so-called hands-off doctrine. Hands-off doctrine is on page 470, and that's pretty much a philosophy which says, look guys, everything what happens behind bars stays behind bars, and we're not involved in it. We pretty much trust DOC and the state, Department of Corrections, to handle it in a morally, lawfully, and ethical way, good way, sound way. And that's the hands-off doctrine. However, that led to some issues, which you can see on 471. And deliberate indifference is one of them, which is nothing else than a court had to step in and define what an inmate's rights are, let's say under the 8th Amendment. It tells here that sometimes harmful conditions in a correctional institution were present and they failed to take steps to increase or remove the bad conditions. Now, courts had to define that over time, and partly it was overcrowding, partly it was the food inmates got. And when you take a look at the picture on page 471, I don't actually know what that is, what they serve prisoners there, but I don't know if that's a healthy meal, and if that increases satisfaction within the jail. Now you can argue and say, well, they didn't deserve any better, which is something this is your opinion, but is that really how we want to treat people? Now I understand that sometimes there are budgetary problems involved, sometimes it's just an organizational problem, but if you take a look at the food on 471, how often do you want to eat it? If you're a criminal or not, it's just a basic question. Answer that for yourself. Then the courts also had to step in, and the hands-off doctrine was adjusted for the identifiable human needs. Now that is a questionable thing, and I think it goes back and forth all the time. What is a human need? Now, we all enjoy our freedom and go and have a steak every once in a while and go out with friends. Well, a prisoner doesn't have that. Is that a human need? Well, a court said no, of course, otherwise we couldn't have a confined environment such a prison. But there are basic human needs, and the institution needs to ensure that basic human needs are kept, protected, and provided to every inmate. And that the definition is given to you for both terms, given to you in 471. But I think you get the point. What the hands-off doctrine was and how it affected our prison culture. When you go to the next slide, I just want to bring up some amendments. We talked about the 8th Amendment a little bit while on the previous slide, but the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States of America guarantees freedom of speech and freedom of religion, for instance. And it's a good example when officials censor mail and, for instance, don't allow headscarves. Those two examples can show you that prisoners do not enjoy the full freedom and full freedom of speech or religion, and do not enjoy the protection to the full extent of the United States Constitution. And why is that? Because, of course, one of the main issues within a facility is security and safety. We want to ensure that a prisoner serves the time safely and can be released afterwards, and he has to serve, or she has to serve, the entire time from the first minute to the last minute. And the sentence was obviously given to the inmate by a judge or by a jury. So the DOC is not there and not in place to punish someone. He or she was already punished when he was sentenced. DOC officials are only there to ensure that it's a safe environment. And when we can see it from this point on, then censoring mail or not allowing headscarves, for instance, makes sense. I want to talk about prison for women in prison for a little bit, and page 475 has a page or 2 pages here about that special population. Obviously, there are more men than women in jail and in prison, and there are some explanations of that in your book. But we can summarize that 49% are white and between 30 and 39 years of age. So that creates a problem. At that time, of a woman's life. I assume I'm not one, but I assume that's the case. Family stands up in the front. Maybe some already have family, have children, and now you take the mother out of that family. So there is, as I listed down there, a motherhood problem. They create little families among themselves, and of course, sometimes they're exposed, unfortunately, to sexual violence of prison staff. There were some cases in the past where this actually happened, unfortunately. Other than that, I have to say that there's no big difference how women are housed and males are housed. It's still the same security level and the same philosophy in making sure they remain safely behind bars. However, eventually, I think in the state of Alaska, we had 94% of our prisoners eventually released back to the community. So the philosophy of just putting someone behind bars, letting him sit there, and eventually release him and say, hey, now do it better, you learned your lesson, doesn't work. And I gave you this example of my probationer in Anchorage who didn't know how to buy a hot dog. So we need to do something with our population and prepare them for the time after incarceration. Otherwise, as I said earlier, we victimize again, and it's not our job in Department of Corrections to victimize again. It's our job to safely house someone as sentenced by a judge and then prepare him or her to go back to the community. If we only say, put someone behind bars, throw the key away, and let him sit there, or let him or her sit there, then do him or his time or her time, and then go back out in the population, and then don't sin no more, you have learned your lesson, most likely doesn't work. So we have reentry programs. Page 478 talks about it for a little bit. And I just list something. Work release program is pretty interesting, where somebody actually can leave jail throughout the day, go to work, and come back. That's a great tool. If somebody's not a threat to our community, why shouldn't he do that? He can go to the community, work, make money, support his family, and come back in the evening. Parole and probation, we talked about in one of the previous lessons. Furlough and halfway houses are a great option. When somebody has no criminal history, let's say he's incarcerated for a false check, for instance, right? And he doesn't physically harm anyone, why not putting him to a halfway house and let him do his time there and make sure he goes to work and raises his family, can be in contact with his family, and still receive some punishment, but we open the door so he can return back to the community, and hopefully we can change his previous lifestyle so he doesn't victimize the community again. We talked about the assistance program a little bit, and the assistance is nothing else, and that's kind of funny. It's a term which describes all tools and methods we use to change so we decrease criminal activity and increase public safety. Does that work? In some cases it does, in some it doesn't. That's just what it is. However, we have one special case, and I want to talk about the special cases before I close that here. Special cases are sex offender reentry programs. There are a lot of research out there. There's a lot of research out there, a lot of numbers out there, which show that there's a high chance a sex offender will victimize our community again. So in some cases, the law simply says for some sex offender-related crimes, there is no parole, no probation. However, even for most sex offenders, eventually they will leave jail. Now, we all know there's a prison culture that a sex offender is, as we always say, the lowest on the totem pole, and will get victimized by other inmates. And I've seen that happening. Sex offenders don't have a lot of respect within their own prison culture, which is kind of interesting because one inmate who killed someone judges another inmate who raped someone. Well, I mean, they're both criminals and both victimize the person. If it's worse or better, I mean, that's a discussion I don't even want to get into. But within a criminal justice system, within the prison population, sex offenders are highly victimized. And the prison I worked, we actually took them out of the mods and provided special mods for them where they're being housed and where special treatment was available for them. Most of them will get back out in the community. So why not using the time in jail to observe them, treatment change, and then ask the parole board and let them make a determination if they can go to parole or not. And some most likely can't. However, the sex offender reentry programs are highly influenced by the victims. The victims have the right, now strongly encouraged to participate, and sometimes parole is simply not given because there's a victim out there that says, hey, look, we can't do that. This person did an awful thing to me or my family, and we can't release him on parole. So sex offender is a very unique approach within the prison population. Okay, that was it for this week. I thank you very much for participation, and I'll see you soon.